Welcome to the Productivity Podcast. Today we're joined by Kent Teague, who shares the passion for Leyton Orient that I do, as the listeners will have heard over various other episodes. Good morning, Kent.
Good morning, Simon. Good to be with you.
Good, thanks for joining us. So Kent's Vice Chairman and Principal Investor at Leyton Orient, owner and Managing Member at Gold Creek Capital, and Chairman and CEO at Lineal Services. So for the listeners, Kent, it'd be good for you if you could give us an overview of your kind of work history and how you've got to where you've got to today.
Sure. As a business person, I started out in a technical field being a software developer. So I wrote software, wrote some network utility software that took a company public in 1994. So now everybody knows I've been writing software for a long time, and I really enjoy the process of writing software. I enjoy the instant feedback and the instant gratification of getting something right. And I also like it that when you do something wrong, it's clear that you did something wrong, right? There's a way it works and there's a way it doesn't work. From there, I went to work for Microsoft. I was in their consulting business for 7.5 years. I was in charge of all retail customers worldwide. So I'm very familiar with how retail works and the technologies that are in retail. We had a big impact on retail back at Microsoft, specifically on the point of sale system, which I'm still very proud of for our group. From there, I went and built a company that is a managed hosting facility provider. Equinix, SunGard are some of the names in that space. Basically, it's where you have colos or, that sort of thing. So just managed hosting facilities where people put their computers and, the managed hosting facility provider does all the cooling and backup internet, backup power, and all that sort of thing. And then from there, I got involved with a friend of mine asked me to be involved in a company in the legal technology space. And I worked in that company for about 1.5 years. And then after that, we started a company called Iris Data Services. And Iris Data Services was in the litigation support space. So we are basically the nerds behind, or the geeks behind, the lawyers. It's our responsibility to get the lawyers all the information that they need in order to figure out how they're going to defend or prosecute a case. And so we do all kinds of things with information. It's a really specialized version of document management. We sold that business in 2015. I decided I wanted to be in the pro sports world. So I was fortunate enough to get together with Nigel Travis, and we purchased Leyton Orient. We've been running that club now for 3 years. I am very pleased that we were able to get Leyton Orient to a spot where we were promoted from the National League back up to the Football League as champions of the National League, which was it's one of my favorite accomplishments in life. And then just recently, we bought Lineal Services, another litigation legal technology company in the UK. My 5-year non-compete, non-solicitation has run out. So now I can go back into that space. And effectively, we're getting the band back together. And so, it's going to be a great ride. We'll see what we can do, and we'll see how much we can help. Unfortunately, litigation is going to be even more prevalent in our near future, probably over the next couple of years, than it has been in the past, simply because there have been so many disruptions worldwide in so many different sectors, in so many different ways. So we expect the business outlook for that business is going to be really good. And yeah, that's kind of my business background. So I'm a tech guy, sales and marketing guy, management guy, production guy, but I really love to figure out how to leverage technology into businesses.
You've done some amazing things. Clearly, getting Orient promoted was probably at the top of that tree, but
it was great. It was fantastic.
Some will agree, some will disagree, but I certainly agree. So
yeah.
if we think about business and productivity, you've been involved in lots of businesses and still are in acquisitions. So what does productivity mean to you within those businesses you've owned and acquired over the years?
There's two parts of productivity that I think about primarily. Number one is that I'm always trying to focus on the overall productivity of the entire, what I would call supply chain, and or the entire process. So, and then there are spot or focused productivity gains. So one of the things to think about is, how am I improving the productivity of the overall process? So one overall process is, there's marketing, then there's sales, then there's customer onboarding, then there's production on behalf of that customer, and then there's billing of that customer, and then there's service of that customer, support of that customer, and then there is a satisfied paying customer. And so to look at the productivity across that entire chain means that you're focused on the productivity of the communication and the interactions between the different departments and between the different segments of the business. Most people think of productivity, and what they want to focus on is, they really just want to focus on what I call spot or focus productivity gains. They want to just focus on sales, or they just want to focus on marketing, or they just want to focus on service, or they just want to focus on technology, or they just want to focus on robotics, or they just want to focus on one particular small area. I believe that one of the most important things to figure out, and I kind of learned this from a book called The Goal that I've read a number of times and had a number of people who work with me read. But The Goal basically says that we need to think about how we increase the throughput of the overall system. So those are the two things that I think about when I think about productivity.
So there's the big picture stuff end to end, and then the smaller tweaks to get some incremental gains within parts of those processes. Is that fair to say?
The interesting thing is that if you over optimize productivity in a certain spot, then you can overrun the ability of a downstream task or a downstream activity to get done, because you've put so much increased work on the downstream activity that you have, by increasing productivity upstream, you've actually created a tremendous bottleneck downstream, and you still don't get the overall throughput. So yeah, that's a challenge.
And you mentioned before, when you talked about your kind of work history, about introducing POS when you were at Microsoft in retail. That's probably still one of the biggest productivity leaps we've still seen in retail. There's been marginal gains, and clearly lots have gone online, but POS going into most retailers was a gigantic leap forward.
Yeah, well, what happened is that point of sale systems in retail were limited in their capability prior to the ones that we introduced in the mid 1990s. They primarily were just a cash drawer, but they didn't, we didn't have scanners. I know this is hard to believe, but we didn't actually have the scanner that now is so pervasive. And the UPC code, I remember when the UPC code was invented, and I remember when we were looking at self-scanners in grocery stores in 1993, 1994, 1995. And so the point of sale systems really, with touch screens integration, really helped point of sale. Scanners really helped point of sale. And yeah, a lot of that. It was a great time, and retail was at a spot where they were ready to turn over all that hardware and all that software and upgrade it all at kind of the same time. So it was a great time.
Yeah, I remember my first job was working on the till in a DIY store, and the first incarnation was pre-POS, where you had to type in the price and assign it to a category. You didn't really know what had been sold. And then we had this new fancy computer that turned up with a red light scanner, and you scanned it and it told you what it was and what color it was and how much it was. And yeah, it was amazing. But yeah, look where it's gone to today.
Just on an aside, I remember the days of whether the red scanner or the green scanner was going to win. There was a red scanner and there was a green scanner, two different companies, and yeah, that was interesting times.
Yeah, it feels like a lifetime ago, but actually it wasn't.
It was a lifetime ago, sir.
So, in terms of productivity, lots of people go down the kind of cost reduction route, and there's clearly a balance between cutting costs too far, and then you reduce service and all the other great things around it. So, how do you balance that growth with cost reduction service element in your considerations?
Well, the way that I fundamentally look at costs differently. So I'm looking at how we're getting a return on investment from a cost perspective. So we look at costs from the perspective of, are we getting the appropriate amount of value out of those costs? And if we're talking about the reduction of headcount from employees, then what we try to do is we try to figure out how to have those employees be valuable in other parts of the business. Because I'm primarily a technology guy, and I've always worked in companies that have grown, and most would say extremely quickly. The worst sort of year over year average is probably somewhere 50%. It's probably the worst. So, the company wasn't twice. It took us about 2 years to be twice as big as we were 2 years ago. So we haven't really looked at, I'm not really very good at cost reductions and doing, cutbacks and that sort of thing. So the way I look at costs is I'm just looking for the appropriate amount of productivity out of that cost. And then how do we make sure that as we scale additional resources, how do we make sure that we're getting that same or even better productivity measure out of that?
And with quick growth, clearly there's a risk that you embed unproductive processes, I assume.
It's hard to do that because we're very cognizant of where the constraints are in the overall throughput system. So we're very, very cognizant of where the optimizations need to be and where the constraints are in the throughput of the overall system. So it's pretty easy for us to identify if there is a lot of inactive capacity in any particular spot along that chain. And so we don't really get caught too often with areas of the business that are not active or that are not productive. Now, one thing that you have to remember, or I always try to remember, is that excess capacity is not a bad thing. You need excess capacity in order to overcome a rush job. Maybe something happened, upstream or downstream that caused a delay, and now you've got more work to do than normal in your particular area over a short period of time. So sometimes a little bit, I always think a little bit of excess capacity in every spot is a good idea so that you can smooth out the unevenness of productivity.
Yeah, and it probably helps with the culture as well, in terms of if you work people too hard all the time, it doesn't become a very nice place to work.
Yeah, that's an interesting thing because I think every person has a different definition of being overworked. What we try to focus on is making it to where they do what they love, they're allowed to do what they love, and they are involved in ways that they want to be. And so they don't view it always as work. Sometimes it's more like a game or more like play. And so that really helps. For me, I'm very unclear as to the difference between work and play. When I go to a Leyton Orient match and I spend from 10 a.m. to 7 p.m. on a match day, some people would call that work. For me, it's not. It's just pure joy. But so I don't need a rest after doing that. I'm really pretty tuned up about that. So it really depends on the individual. There are ways that you can overwork somebody either mentally or physically, and those do need to be watched for. But I think for the most part, people, if they love their work, they love to be at work.
And that bit of spare capacity gives it the chance to be not all about
Sure.
work, which I think is important.
Sure.
So productivity in business is interesting. How do you transpose that across then to productivity in football?
Well, football's a challenge. We were very fortunate to have a manager named Justin Edinburgh, and he and I talked about productivity a lot on the pitch. And the thing that we asked Justin to look at was where would be the easiest for the team and where would be the easiest for each individual player to improve, but 5%, only 5%. That's all we were asking for. So as a striker, could we get them to improve 5% on ball handling, holding up the ball, playing defense, being aggressive, causing a turnover? What were the metrics in the midfield? What were the metrics for, the goalie, the left back, right back, center backs? And we just asked Justin to improve our overall play 5%. We actually did not achieve that. We didn't improve 5%. It was a little bit less than 5% based on the metrics that we set. But because the overall system had been improved, and because each individual player that was on the pitch and the ones who came off the bench had improved, we went from finishing sort of lower mid-table to being champions the very next year. And I think that a lot of people believe that they have to improve a massive, massive amount to make a big difference. And I don't think that's necessarily true. I think small incremental gains over a long period of time can take you from where you are to where you want to be from a productivity perspective. And when you look back at where you came from, you can't believe that you've gotten to where you've gotten to. And there are so many innovative ways to improve, both by learning, eliminating mistakes, so many different ways to improve and so many different ways to get better, even on a football pitch, which is 11 people in a little bit of a disorganized, situation, right?
Yeah.
and really unable to be directed. But there are ways that you can improve no matter what you're focused on. I believe there are ways that you can improve. You can improve your relationship and your interaction with your spouse, your children, your parents, your siblings, your neighbors, your coworkers. I believe that there are ways that you can increase the level of trust that people have in you. I think that's a very valuable thing to improve. And that's one of the things that we tried to get the players to do. Figure out how to improve and increase the amount of trust they had in each other, in themselves, and in the team.
Yeah, it's interesting because there's lots of parallels with the first part of this conversation around the bigger picture and then those spot increases. If the players are all the spots, then the sum of all the parts means that big increase that propelled us to back in the Football League. So
and what's interesting about that, Simon, is that you've also got to look at what we did in the 4 or 5 trade windows. So it wasn't that we could keep the same exact player and they could improve enough. And sometimes we had to go get a different player to come in and fill a particular role, and then they played that role so much better than the previous person. And those step ups sometimes, so in a supply chain, right, in a production chain, sometimes you may have to automate. You may have to go to a robotic solution or a more technically aggressive solution like artificial intelligence, machine learning, robotics,
Hmm.
and you do have to replace humans in a certain way, or you have to augment humans in a certain way. So it's not just that you take whatever you have and you improve that, and that's the only way you can do it. Sometimes you have to bring in new pieces and new parts too. So it's challenging. It's challenging.
Yeah, and the leaders always have a big impact on that, as you mentioned, Justin, and we all miss him. And just remember the good times that he brought us, because they certainly were in that season.
Yeah, no doubt. Well, he did really well from the day he started, right? I mean, his points to game ratio is one of the highest in all of Leyton Orient history. So, yeah, he did very well.
He'll always be remembered.
No doubt. No doubt.
So one question we're asking everybody who comes on the podcast, and we've had some really, really amazing bits of answers, is what's the best bit of business advice you've ever been given?
Wow. I've been given a lot of business advice.
Some good and some bad, I
Let
suspect.
me, this is going to be a little strange, I think, maybe for a lot of people. At Microsoft, there was a very strong belief that the people who created the wealth should share in the wealth they created. And while that's not necessarily what someone might call a piece of business advice, it was something that I took to heart very, very dearly. Bill was very good to me, and I was very good to Bill.
Mm-hmm.
And so, it's interesting if you structure your company or you structure your business around the idea that you're going to create wealth, and you're going to create so much wealth that you have enough to share with everyone who helped create that wealth. I think the second piece of business advice that I was given, again at Microsoft, was allow the employees to set their own goals and their own expectations, and then align those with the overall objectives. And what we found at Microsoft, and what I found since then, is that when employees are allowed to say, these are my goals for the next 6 months or the next year, these are the things I'm dedicated to figuring out, these are the things I'm dedicated to improving, a lot of times the individual employee is more aggressive about what they want to accomplish than we would have been as a manager telling them what we wanted them to accomplish. And what also happens is when it's their commitment, it's their goal, it's their objective, then they are even more committed to it, and they figure out ways to get things done that you don't necessarily understand or believe or expect when it first gets started. And so what we do as a process is we set overall high level objectives for the business, and then we get the individual objectives from each employee, and then we marry those two together. And that's another sort of like business process that I think has made a tremendous, tremendous difference for the businesses that I've worked at. And then the last piece of business advice that I got again at Microsoft is people are human. Now that seems like a strange piece of advice from a business perspective, but I think what was being communicated to me by Steve Ballmer was that they make mistakes, they're fallible, they're not perfect, They have strengths, they have weaknesses, but they are intelligent, they are creative, they are passionate, they are loving, they are caring, they are human. And the important thing to do is to build a team of humans that rely on each other, that cover each other's weaknesses, that create value together, that enjoy being together, and that's how you build a great business. That you build great businesses with people, through people, because of people. That's why we're doing all of this stuff. And I'll never forget Steve kind of telling me this, and I was just amazed that the guy that was running Microsoft was telling me that it was all about people when I thought it was all about technology, right? And he was like, "No, it's about technology sometimes, but most of the time, it's about people." So I would say those three things: people who create wealth should share in the wealth they create. Allow the employees to set their own objectives over a 6 or 12 month period of time, review how they've done, and then marry that to the overall objectives of the business. And then remember that, people are human, and that's the reason you're in business.
Love all three of those. Really good.
Yep.
So thanks for joining us, Kent. I look forward to seeing you around Leyton Orient in the near future, whatever the world holds.
Yeah, I have a huge hole in my Saturdays right now. I don't have a trip planned to Leyton, which just bothers me to no end. It's been 2 months since I've been there. That's probably the longest time it's been since I've been to London, since we've owned the team. So yeah, I'm really looking forward to getting back and being back in London. And Lineal Services is also in London, so I got more than one great reason to come back.
Well, thanks for joining us, Kent. Take care.
Yeah, thank you, Simon. All the best.